There we go. Thank you, Terri. So we've been hearing a lot recently about ecosystems in business, and that includes in talent and workforces. Where do you see the concept of ecosystems play out in the contingent or in the extended workforce?
Yeah, it's funny, Jeff, you say that because that word is like everywhere. Everybody's got an ecosystem of something. The way that we kind of see it is a lot of that is about the talent has become so dispersed across several different platforms and the rise of solopreneurs and the rise of the remote workforce. And so the ecosystems are really needed to kind of support and engage this workforce now, right? So that's technology and solution providers. And they're really going to be kind of the enabler and the guides to bringing together this very disparate workforce, right? So a lot of that is, it's interesting because our industry is very competitive. So the thought of, a payrolling provider maybe working with another, payrolling provider's technology and then an MSP and then maybe freelancer platforms and everyone coming together to kind of enable this workforce is a foreign concept. So we're really big on collaborating with competitors. But I think a lot of this is about partnerships that need to come together. Different providers need to come together and solution agents to be the enablers for this talent and be able to go and find them in this very kind of dispersed environment. And core to that, which is this is a big thing for us, and it's core to what we do, is the technology is the nucleus, right? Which I know you guys love to hear that, right? But it's true. Technology is the seeker and the finder and the enabler, and it's really kind of the nucleus of these different partnerships. So these solution providers coming together and these different technology providers coming together, and it's already happened. These ecosystems are already popping up kind of organically, but that's really what this is about, because there's this whole thing, and I say this over and over about the talent shortage, and that's not true. Talent's there. They're not hiding. It's just that they want to work differently, or they want to work part-time, or they want to live in an Airbnb in Croatia and work from there, or they're retired and they now want to come back into the workforce. And so this ecosystem really needs to kind of spring up to support this widely dispersed workforce and find a way to bring them into organizations and connect those workers to the people that need their services. That's how we see ecosystems. But I'm curious what you would think, because it's a kind of an overused word. Like, what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, so ecosystems is one of those words where it's very effective in capturing an idea or a model. Mm-hmm. And then for better or worse, in the world of HR tech, it becomes a buzzword very quickly. And everyone jumps on it. And so that tends to diminish its usefulness sometimes when everyone's talking about it, or meanings can be diluted. But what I think about when I reflect on the term ecosystem is really, it's about maybe an alternative to kind of a siloed or very tight supply chain approach. Mm-hmm. to the supply of talent. And another part of an ecosystem, if you think about the true notion of ecosystem kind of from biology, is when one entity thrives, the entire ecosystem can thrive. And so, you've mentioned in your comment cooperating or coopetition. I think you didn't use that word,
yeah,
but
that's the word. I was trying to think of it.
the idea that you can actually benefit your own organization, your interest, by benefiting others in the ecosystem, I think is a really important approach. And then, of course, your comments about technology really being kind of the aggregator or the glue or the interface with that ecosystem, I think is really important. And important in that technology, again, a word that's overused so much is agile, but that evolution in ecosystem requires technology that can adapt and adjust really quickly as well.
Completely agree.
So thank you for that. And I really like the perspective on this notion of the talent shortage being a myth. While there are some truths in a skills gap, I think, that we've been talking about, the talent is there and it's ready to contribute. And
that's
ready
a good point too. Yeah.
To learn and develop those skills. So given that perspective, what are some of the main changes in the contingent or the extended workforce that you've seen over the past few years?
Well, I think the biggest thing we see is that contingent and extended workers have become more human, right? They become more a vital part of your workforce, not something that's kind of non or other or alternate, where you kind of bring someone in, for a temporary role. Because of the explosive growth of this workforce and because of the way this is the way that they want to work, I think that that's kind of changed the way that they're perceived, and that they're just as vital part of your organization as any other worker. And, there's still a lot of, I think, misinformation or misnomers around contingent or independent contractors or consultants, that they're not going to be as skilled as a permanent worker, right? Or they're not going to be as dedicated. Again, it's that kind of old employment construct that employees are kind of the holy grail. And I think that that's also shifting, because if anything, and I learned this personally, this skill set has to be even more dedicated and more skilled, because if you're not, you're gone, like you don't eat. So, I think in a lot of big corporations, and you and I have probably come across this, in the traditional employment construct, 9 to 5, top-down management, especially the bigger corporations, there's a lot of really dysfunctional, unhealthy behavior and ways of doing business and ways of getting things done. I think that there's a lot of places for mediocrity to hide in big companies. Mediocrity, psychopathy, what is it? That science, it was an analysis that the highest concentration of sociopaths were CEOs. I just think that the environment that we're moving away from is more conducive to, leveraging people where they want to work, how they want to work, the way that they want to work. I think we're moving to more outcomes-based work versus tenure, someone working 3, 4, 5, 7 years. There's a lot of, we're removing the stigma of job hopping. If someone's somewhere 6 months and they go somewhere else for a year, 10 years ago, that was a problem. Now that I think that's becoming more the norm. And so a lot of this is really just letting go of that traditional employment construct and embracing this workforce, and embracing the way that they want to work, because now some of your best talent is in these talent communities. They don't want to be a permanent employee. And so and we're going to talk a little bit about this. I think the workforce is there, but the organizations that need to embrace this workforce need some help kind of catching up, as well as, state and federal agencies that want to regulate it.
Sure. I love that comment regarding the stigma. And of course, there's always exceptions to this, but in my experience in HR and in talent management, the contingent workforce has really been seen as kind of either in a positive light, either a very niche place, meaning you can go find some very hard to find, very specialist expertise and engage it if you can't find somewhere else, or it's really been a secondary source, which has kind of led to this notion of the contingent or extended workforce being stigmatized, or this notion of otherness that you mentioned. And it's great to see that, that's changed. Anything else on how that stigma has changed in your view?
Well, I think it's more around, we already talked about how they're being perceived, but I think it's also just kind of embracing that this workforce wants to work differently. They like the flexibility and the autonomy, the benefits of working this way. This is the way that they're showing up. And so I think that we need to hold space for that, right? Gallagher's been doing this for years. When I first started, I had to use micro consulting because I was a woman-owned business and I didn't have any funding, and I had to get creative to get things done. And so I found that using a part of someone's brain or 10 hours of their time a week was perfect for them, because they were also working for Disney and Caesars and all these other companies. And so, working that way is actually very effective. And it also lets the worker kind of show up the way that they want to. And the other thing that's interesting too is, I've noticed even with some of these consultants, and they're very good at what they do, they want to show up a certain way. Like I had one a couple of weeks ago. I was like, hey, I need you to be at this meeting. She's like, yeah, I'm not going. I'm not really feeling that. What do I say? She doesn't do meetings, but she crushes the deliverables that I need her to do, So there's a little bit of like, let her have it. Who cares? I could kind of speak that piece if she shows up. So a lot of it's just kind of letting go of this kind of top-down control way of doing things, and really kind of embracing the contingent workforce the way that they want to work, and letting them work 10 hours a month, and So I think that that's really what's happening, those changes.
Yeah, that's really interesting, this kind of change in management approach and this addressing the preferences of the workforce. And it really is kind of an extension of this consumerization of work, or consumerization of work in HR technology in particular. Along with that, are you noticing any difference in the makeup or the demographics of the contingent workforce?
I mean, definitely. And we talked about this too, the whole idea of and otherness. I think that that's kind of like going away. Those lines are getting blurred, as we talked about earlier. A lot of companies are also looking at DE&I now. How do we embrace that within contingent workforce now that they're a bigger part of our enterprise org? How do we make sure that we are embracing more DE&I within that workforce? How are we making sure that we're focusing on that? Maybe some of the things we put in place for permanent workforce to ensure that we get more minority and women-owned and other categories into our workforce. How can we deploy that? It's been a little slow going. There's a couple things organically that are happening to help it along, which is women, right? So, women really just took a double whammy. During the pandemic, some of them had to leave the workforce to stay home and homeschool kids. There's a lot of changes as far as them being able to work the way that they wanted to, or, just being laid off, or there's so many changes that kind of interfered with their ability to make a living, that now that things are coming back, they're like, you know what, I don't want to go back to that environment. I want to be a solopreneur. I want to start my own company. So organically, the workforce is already becoming more diverse from that perspective. So I think, that's really helpful. But, the biggest thing around contingent workforce, and we worked on a survey, actually. It was we had a project that we worked with another provider to kind of look at how companies were approaching DE&I within the contingent workforce. And the willingness was there to, how do we embrace this? But as far as like how to do it compliantly, there's a lot of fear around, well, can we really look at numbers and data of who's coming in, and will we get in trouble by the EEOC? Well, if we give it to the staffing providers, they can worry about it because they've got ways of doing that. And we see a lot of that happening. So I do see a lot changing as far as how this workforce is going to be viewed, and more concessions being made, but it's a little slow going. Because again, there's still that outdated paradigms about Microsoft Permatemp and co-employment, and can we have them at our meetings, and can we give them do we have to give them a blue badge? There's still a little bit of this keeping everyone at arm's length, so everybody's terrified of the IRS. So I think that some of that's going to change too, to kind of enable embracing this workforce and embracing DE&I very aggressively within this workforce.
So that's very interesting. This notion of Microsoft Permatemp still kind of driving behaviors.
God, I'm so sick of hearing about that, and tenure limits, and I'm like, let it go, people.
Right, exactly. So you started to get at this a little bit, but I wonder if we could dive a little bit deeper into some of the behavior changes in terms of the client or the customer organizations, the enterprise employers, and then also maybe suppliers in the middle. What are some of the behavior changes that you're either seeing or that need to happen in order to fully take advantage of these shifts that you've described?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, like, you and I and all of our peers, we live and breathe this 24/7, trends and technology trends and co-employment law and the explosive growth of solopreneurs. And so we're already embracing ecosystem concepts, and we're embracing leveraging more of this workforce. And you guys are embracing what you're doing with your technology and kind of leveling up with how you're going to branch out into these ecosystems and bring in this workforce. But one of the things we're seeing on the organization side is they are not where we are at all. They definitely see the value of bringing more of this workforce in, and they want to understand it. But again, they're still very kind of bound by these other more traditional employment constructs, especially the Fortune 100 and 500. And so a lot of them are really just needing advisory around what tech products do we use, and can we use more ICs, and how do we do that compliantly, and what's really out there to help us enable the workflows of sourcing and seeking and onboarding this workforce, then integrating that workforce. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for people, like Gallagher and FlexTrack and some of these other companies to really step into an advisory and consultative role and try to do that as neutral as possible. A lot of them are also getting advisory and consultation from, big box software companies saying, oh, you just need to implement our tech and everything will be fine. There's your consultation. And so I think that there's kind of a next level of consultation that's needed around that. Another thing that we're seeing too is a lot of our clients are staffing, mid-market staffing, that are looking to do digital transformations or kind of upping their game around technology so that they can step into advanced workforce solutions beyond just staff aug. And we're seeing them really move away from some of the more traditional MSP and CWM management programs, that have not been very friendly to the supplier community, frankly, very command and control. And the customers are actually looking at what are other ways we could bring talent in. And so we're seeing a lot of suppliers kind of move away from these more traditional models and leveraging their digital transformation and saying to the customer, hey, we bring just as much to the table. We bring in multiple sources of talent. So why don't we just work directly? So we're seeing a little bit around that too. I don't know what you guys are seeing because you also have some of these clients.
Well, you mentioned digital transformation, and it's really interesting because it's one of those words that's been used a lot in the past 5 years.
Yes.
And there's a lot to it though. I think one of the things we're seeing is HR in particular, but the rest of the organization has really kind of been in the middle of this enterprise transformation or enterprise digital transformation. And I think in order to make that transformation complete, there needs to be an extension of the practices and of the mindsets and even of the technologies that facilitated some of that digital transformation in the enterprise to the extended workforce. And so, one of the possibilities is, about half of contingent or extended workforce programs are, we'll say, owned by HR, but a lot of the practices, are still, as you described, kind of separate from mainstream talent practices.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see a need to kind of continue this digital transformation, or we might even call it digital business enablement. Now that I think the world has moved digital transformation, particularly by moving to the cloud, there's some other steps to take. We feel strongly that platform as a service is the next evolution.
Agreed.
From software as a service, which has been extremely helpful in that digital transformation. But we see a need to extend it and further it to enable, a lot of the things that we've been talking about in terms of business transformation. And that kind of brings us to the role of HR, and that's the space that I've covered. Particularly, HR has been kind of front and center, at least in terms of employee experience. Should HR become more involved in the extended workforce, given all the demands that's already on its plate?
I think they have no choice. I think they already are, whether they like it or not. And, the other thing you mentioned is technology. So, traditionally HR has been all about risk management for the company and compliance and performance reviews. And now they're being asked to sit at the table with all the O's, CIO and CHRO and CTO, and help with, HRIS technology decisions and help with workforce strategy decisions. So they're being asked to level up as far as their involvement and their sophistication level around this tech. So absolutely, they need to be more involved, and they really already are, right? So, because I've said, everyone keeps talking about the future of work, and that's over. Like, it's here. It's not in the future. Like, this is the way we work now. And so the HR leadership is really needing to kind of step in and have a seat at the table and work with some of these other leaders and help make these decisions. And some of the things we've seen, which is interesting, it's an interesting dynamic, but some of the clients we've talked to, there's the whole, like, is it procurement or is it HR? And, we had like one client that was the procurement organization was making all the decisions around, bringing in a solution to manage their contingent workforce. And there's this kind of like eye roll, oh yeah, we got to bring in talent acquisition and keep them happy. And there's a little bit of us and them. And I think that the more that these parties can come together and the more that HR is integrated into these types of decisions, sooner rather than later, is only going to help the company. It's only going to, benefit the company to kind of get to that next level around embracing this workforce. And then,
you mentioned,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
mentioned the eye roll, and in my HR
Yeah.
history, I've observed that eye roll as I've tried to enter, different conversations. Some of the skepticism is deserved, of course, but I also, to give credit to my field for really taking some steps forward over the past few years, again, in terms of digital transformation and business enablement. So what's your advice, or what are you seeing in terms of, the rest of the organization getting HR more involved in some of these discussions? Is there an openness, despite a little bit of history or skepticism, an openness for HR to be more involved here?
Well, I think it's two sides. I think it's one, bringing them to the table more around these higher level corporate discussions that are actually going to impact bottom line, like technology decisions. Workforce impacts bottom line. If you don't have workers, they're the lifeblood of your company. You have no company, you have no product, then you have no revenue. So I think it's including them in those types of decisions, and understanding that the decisions that HR are involved in do have bottom line impacts. And the other piece of that is, the future of work has kind of thrown everyone together kind of organically, and that's a good thing. And I think that HR also has a responsibility to embrace that as well, right? So I think HR is already going on its own kind of PR campaign. If you see posts on LinkedIn about, how they're, doing things differently and becoming more knowledgeable around technology, I think there's a little bit of, at least my experience working with HR, and this is not to disparage anyone with HR, but there's, the priority was always like, we're managing risk for the company. And I always felt like if I had an issue in the environment I was working within, I would just get kind of placated, because they're there to mitigate risk. And as long as I wasn't going to sue anybody, they're like, all right, we'll just take a course on how to deal with difficult people. You know what I mean? So I think that that kind of traditional HR role is not really going to fit in this environment. And I think that HR leaders really need to kind of let go of maybe some of these older constructs and be comfortable doing that. Now, the other side of that is, you and I both know, I've met some HR leaders that are just amazing, sophisticated, they know exactly what they're doing, very strategic thinkers. We need to see more of that.
Sure. And I think again, over the past few years, particularly with digital transformation, I've seen that as well from our research and our interactions, or my research and interactions. There's a lot of really solid business leaders and pioneers taking the HR function forward. So that's good to see. Maybe let's go back to technology now. Again, you've heard a little bit about our perspective, but from your perspective, what are some of the technologies that are needed to move kind of from a siloed or really kind of tight supply chain approach to something that's more ecosystem oriented?
Well, if you look at just the new technologies that are coming out around HRIS, on-demand workforce platforms, recruiting networks, all of these different subcategories of technologies. I think, I won't mention their name, but they put out an ecosystem, and it's about 2,500 different tech platforms that are in this ecosystem for HR to look at. And there's more coming up every day. So I think that could be very overwhelming. We get those questions all the time, like, which 2 tech products should I use for my company? Could you just narrow that down? And it's such a huge question. So I think we need to get away from like, we just need to work with 1 or 2 pieces of tech. I keep saying decentralization is a new centralization. And I think we need to be a bit more holistic around, looking at multiple pieces of tech, not only HRIS, but on-demand workforce platforms, those entry points for workers to come in, IC indemnification and compliance, and then being okay with having a kind of a fragmented tech stack. And, and maybe a data warehouse is the nucleus, right? To bring it all together so that they can track data. There's a lot of, as middleware products that are popping up in APIs. So I think you've got to look at the client's environment and what their appetite for change is. And, are they conservative, or do they want to do something more progressive? And then you need to kind of look at what's going to make the most sense for them. And what we found, the technology implementations we've gone through with some of our clients, is that iterative is better than big bang. Implement a piece of tech to fix some pieces of your business, then build on those wins, and, make sure that you've got the right discovery and requirements. And the other thing too is, AI is not a bad thing. AI is actually just enabling the humans and taking away some of the more mundane and routine things and kind of elevating us so that we can do what we do best, which is build relationships and think critically. And so, AI is getting rid of some jobs, but it's creating new ones. So I think that that's, the biggest thing around the tech is everybody get away from thinking you've got to pick like the two best products. There's no such thing.
Sure, but it sounds like there's a change in mentality or change in approach if you're going to go away from the two best products to really being able to, adapt and incorporate these new solutions that are coming online, as well as maybe sunset or decommission some of the old ones that don't work.
Yeah, we call it cannibalize as you kind of move along and, get rid of some of these old products or older tech products. And that just kind of happens on its own. But it's overwhelming. Sure. It's overwhelming for a lot of these clients. Like, which tech do we pick? I was like, if I could answer that question for you, I could charge double what I charge. It's a big question. Sure,
it takes a lot of hours and expertise.
Yeah.
To make that answer right for a particular organization. And my experience is there's no one answer.
Exactly.
Each organization is different based on its business, on its context, on its maturity, on its strategy. Lots of different factors that go in. So you can't really issue a sweeping generalization about a specific tech or techs, other than you need to be able to be agile and continuously incorporate, different solutions based on your needs. So what level of change management goes with this modernizing approach of your contingent workforce strategy?
Well, I think organizations are already used to change management, right? They're already used to doing that with some of the other tech products that they have. So I think it's kind of respecting and appreciating what's already in place and what is working well, and taking this approach that we're going to build on that and make your organization work better. The other piece of that is to include people from all levels of the organization. Like for you guys, when you implement a VMS, right, you want to make sure that day one, you've got someone from procurement, HR, a technology person to help with the requirements, your noisy buyer, the one that's going to have a lot of activity and will evangelize if it goes well and make your life miserable if it doesn't. Bring them to the table and make sure that they have a say. I think we mentioned HR and then of course a stakeholder. But I think it's really important to involve the right people early so that they not only are building the requirements and giving you accurate requirements, but now they own the process and they're part of it. And so they're going to help ensure that it's successful. That's how we work. We've worked that way with our clients. What we found doesn't work is when you have this kind of top down from the ivory tower. By the way, we're now implementing Workday and everybody's going to be on board with it. And yet they went to no one to get requirements or to find out if it's going to fix their pain. And that never works. That never works well. So I think those are the biggest things.
Throughout the research, throughout the research that I've done over the past 5 or 6 years, really one of the consistent themes, other than, instilling trust in anything that you're doing and it's related, is getting the people affected by the change involved in the change planning.
Yeah, it's
itself.
so easy and so few do it.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
You mentioned that. So do you see an advantage of moving from a SaaS-based system to a PaaS-based approach?
So this is, I think the biggest thing here is that customers need to understand what is the difference between the two. I actually had to Google that myself after you mentioned it, so I could say something intelligent. You might actually be helping more with this question than myself, but I think customers feel more comfortable where they can control the cost, whereas you've got like the VMS model and it's a percentage of spend, which can fluctuate wildly. We're seeing a lot of VMS providers go to more of a SaaS model. And then of course the PaaS model for like some of, these workforce platforms where it's just, it's a fixed fee. I think that clients really like having that kind of control and knowing upfront what they're going to spend. And I think it also validates the technology and the platform that, you're purchasing a solution and a service and there's a cost to that and you're going to get X for the cost. I think that that's really where we need to move to and move away from maybe some of these older pricing models we've seen in contingent workforce management, for instance. And I know some of the bigger players are moving to that. And then you have some clients that are very attached to, percentage of spend and some of these other things. But I mean, you're much more knee deep in the tech side of things than I am. What are you guys seeing?
We're seeing some similar perspectives to you. There's this kind of supplier funded approach to VMSs is well entrenched in the industry, both the technology as well as in the clients. And there's lots of reasons for that. They don't have to go get POs. They don't have to go make a case for either capital expenditures or operating expenses. So there's a lot of there's a lot of history there. I think we're seeing a lot of the appeal of the new models is a little bit better understanding of what you're spending versus some of it being kind of included in, let's say, in bill rates,
AKA buried.
Buried. And so one of the things we're trying to do is raise a lot of visibility, not only with regards to the workforce, but also with what it costs. And so we offer obviously very flexible pricing. We can do it the old way if that's what is best for the customer and what the customer is interested in. But we're also very flexible in terms of offering, more customary technology fees so that it's a little bit more predictable and visible for those who are responsible for managing the spend in the organization. And again, going back to kind of the past model, if suppliers and if other organizations, other enabling solutions are maintaining their APIs, it actually becomes far less expensive to kind of plug and play different solutions, different suppliers, and different features as well. So raising that perspective on expense and recognizing that you can actually save quite a bit in terms of implementation and integration costs, I think is an important factor.
Very good point. I agree. I agree completely. I think things are definitely changing in that space in the way that they're monetized, and most clients are okay with it. Sounds like.
I think it's mixed. I think there's some that are very entrenched in the old way of thinking, and then there are some that are recognizing, hey, we can free ourselves kind of from this, these hooks from a system that is, has served us well in the past, but might be a little bit outdated, and that thinking. Could I continue that line, because this is, and maybe this, maybe we won't use this in the recording, but this is one of those things that we're coming up against. Is what would your advice be to a client who might say, oh, you know what, it's just easier for us to maintain this, percentage of spend model and kind of, incorporate or bury, as you say, the cost of the VMS into the bill rates. And so what would you advise clients, or how would you approach a client who is really kind of interested in sticking with that model?
Well, I think the big thing with that is you're now handing over the cost of your product outside of your span of control. You're handing it over to either the supplier community who's going to be paying for the product. And there are lots of things they could do with bill rates to kind of make that cost neutral for them too, which then comes back to you. So, it's a bit of a trade-off, because like you said, you don't have to go and get a PO, you don't have to do some of those other things you would have to do from a budget, but then it also creates a much more volatile cost model, right? For what you're going to be spending for a product that is fairly static. If your spend goes from 100 million to 300 million, and then you're paying 6% of that, you're now doubling what you're paying for the same product for basically the same things with maybe a bit more transactional volume. But is it really worth double? Just like these MSPs, they'll charge 2 and 3%, 2%, the percentage will go down for, $100 million program, and then it goes to 300 million. And they're like, okay, well, now we're only going to pay 1.5%, but they're still getting what, 3.5 million to do what? You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I think clients have to kind of think about that trade-off when they're trading off these different cost models that are probably less invasive to go get approvals for, but then they're more volatile.
Sure. I mean, and the argument there as well, when we're busier, we'll we'll obviously spend more. And when we're not as busy, we'll spend less on the technology. But I don't know if anyone's really seen like a side-by-side comparison.
Well, the opposite is
those bill
true.
rates are hard. Yeah.
Like you said too, if the spend goes way down, it's really hard for some of these MSPs and VMSs to be profitable. And in my previous life, when I was with MSPs and we'd go in and land a client and the spend was X, and then I'd hire 2 or 3 people and they're like, nope, never mind, we're just kidding, the spend's actually half that, but they didn't want to tell us until we got in there and we're left holding the bag on the cost. And then I had negative P&Ls, and it's just, I'm personally obviously not a fan of the model, that pricing model, but for either side, really.
Yeah. It's interesting as you're saying this, I'm thinking about how we opened this conversation in terms of ecosystem. So, maybe some of the previous thinking might have been, well, let's squeeze our suppliers for as much as we can. And, there's a little bit of a race to the bottom. There's always been a race to the bottom in terms of rates because the industry is so competitive. But if industry practices during a downturn are making it difficult for an ecosystem player to maintain its level of staffing or its level of service with its solution, that at some point might come back and be detrimental to your organization, particularly in terms of retooling. Now, I'm not advocating for spending more money than you need to, but I'm reflecting on how this model could be better for both suppliers and for customers in the short and long term as well, especially if we're really raising the cost, and you can be explicit about the cost to both the customer and the cost to maintain the solution on the side of the MSP or the VMS.
Yeah, I think you're giving the customer more control over the cost, really.
Yeah.
And more control over the outcomes. And I agree with you. Some of these, the race to the bottom on the supplier side, that's why a lot of suppliers aren't working with MSPs anymore.
Yeah,
the margins.
So we've gone through our questions. That was quick. I heard maybe 1 or 2 that's all.
Oh, good.
So well done. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I think however you guys decide to market this or slice and dice it, I'll certainly promote it. And I appreciate all the time and attention that went into putting out a good interview. So that showed.
Sure.
Thank you. You'd be surprised.
Well, I want you to have a good experience. Hopefully come up with something we can both be proud of and use, and maybe, have a mutual learning exchange. I'm wondering if you'd be open to one more question.
Sure.
From me, and it's related to kind of this, it is, I think International Women's Day, this was this month. It's Women's History Month.
International Women's Pay, International Women's Day, and then Equal Women's Pay, I think, was yesterday.
Yeah. So I would like to ask you a question on something like, what's it like for you to be, a successful business owner right now, ready to take your business to the next level, which really seems like you're kind of retooling yourself and making the investments to take it to the next level. Would you open to answering that type of question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. So let me try the question first to make sure it's okay, and then we'll go from it. So it'll be something
I'm sure it'll be fine. Let me fix my air conditioning because it's like 95 degrees in here.
All right.
Hold on.
All right. You ready?
I'm back.
Okay.
Wait, hold on.
Thank you.
Sort of back. Okay, now I'm really back.
Great. So Terri, you mentioned, in some of the changes you're seeing in the contingent or extended workforce is kind of it's an option for women who have been adversely affected by the pandemic, as well as many other workplace dynamics. Could you share your perspective this month in particular on what it's been like to be the founder of a women-owned business who's been through the past 5 years of growth and really started to get your business off the ground, and then maybe reflect on what it's like as you're ready to take your business to the next level at this point?
Well, I appreciate you asking that. It's really been an interesting journey. I think one of the things that a lot of the cliches are true. One of the things that I had to learn early is by nature, women are uncomfortable at understanding our value and asking for what we're worth. So when I started out as an independent consultant, I almost consistently underbid myself, not realizing it, and when I started working with other men and, bringing them onto my teams, and I'd watch the way that they would show up. And I hired a couple that were like, I don't really have a ton of experience around this, but I could totally figure it out, and they'd show up to the client like they were the Mac Daddy and knew everything, and I would like research and make sure I had like 70% of it. And I was still like, not sure. So I think there's still this little bit of women and imposter syndrome. And I hate that works, it's overused, but, really kind of stepping in and embracing our value and monetarily asking or demanding like this, this is what we need to make. And then I think the other part of that is, we just bring different skills to the table. I've never been a killer, and a lot of like when you start a business or build a company, there's all these books and tapes and videos about kill or be killed, and it's a knife fight, and business is a jungle. And I've certainly experienced some really crappy things, early in my business, and I was a little naive, and some things, I was taken advantage of, but I still see them as learning opportunities. But at the end of the day, I find that the most powerful thing when you're engaging a customer or a client or getting a deal is like showing up from a place of authenticity and vulnerability and collaboration and creativity and all the things that are not perceived as strong business traits. I finally learned like year 5 to kind of lean into those, like those are my superpower. And before I felt like I had to hide them, I had to show up, I had to be a baller, I had to go after this deal, and I don't do that anymore. And that's when my business took off, which is really interesting. So I think, women, it's okay to be women, and it's okay to kind of lead from that place. It's still strong. It's still going to get your business to where it needs to be. So I think that was the biggest thing. That took me about 5 years to learn.
Interesting. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. I wanted to capture this just because it'd be nice to send out a clip, and have your perspective. I think, I have a lot of respect for what you've been able to do in a very competitive business.
Very.
And to get yourself to this point where you're now emerging as an authority on these things, and hopefully taking yourself and your business to the next level of growth.
That's
so
the
thank you
plan.
for
With
sharing
help,
that.
right? From our ecosystem. We'll do it together.
Of course. So thank you for sharing that. I hope my hope is to get some things back to you no later than Monday. Would that be okay?
Oh yeah, that's plenty. I'm actually, that'll work, because Thursday and Friday I'm traveling. So
okay.
and then have some meetings. So yeah, that would be perfect.